So here we are, just a few days after we said we'd be from last year. Remember I said we'll be back next week? And that was a few days before Thanksgiving in 2012.
Well, that's a few days after Thanksgiving now.
In 2013. So we've made it another year.
Yeah.
Both of us. You've had your 90th birthday.
And we've got another baby coming.
Yeah, in January, and had the baby last year.
This the baby of the year. This is 3 years in a row, all in January.
Yeah, so.
Well, one of them didn't come till February 1st, but he was due in January.
So it's been a really good year, really, most ways, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So when I checked the tape, or whatever you call it, the recording, it seemed like we got to your life in State College, and where Sandy and Bob were born, right? And your husband at the time, Nathan, was somehow getting a ride to work. We talked a little bit about that.
Well, that's when we first went there, when we lived in McAlevy's Fort.
Yeah.
Which my kids remember my talking about it. It seems as if we lived there for years. It was only about 6 weeks. But it seemed like years.
That's when you had to heat up your own furnace, right?
Yes.
Cut wood.
Yes. And the furnace kept going out, and we didn't know how to keep it going.
I think we've all heard that story.
Yes, and then we didn't have water for 3 days. And
so that's where we were, and we also talked a little bit at that time about your parents and your mom dying like 7 years after your dad, which was sort of in those days the average.
Yeah, yes, that's the edge. And I remember when he died, it was so upsetting to her to be a widow.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm a widow.
Yeah. And you've been one now for how long? 17 years?
It'll be 18 years in January.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's hard to believe.
Well, I thought maybe we could talk a little bit, if you can remember, about what was going on in the world around you in those years at State College, and let's just repeat when they were, and what do you remember about that time?
Well, what I remember was the time when the Rosenbergs were executed as spies, and of course we were very much opposed to that. And I remember it was sometime when we lived in State College for about 5 years, so I don't remember exactly when that was. But we got a call from an old friend of Nathan's, and Ruth Greenblatt, saying, "You have to send me $100. Well, $100 was a lot of money in those days. But she said they were trying to, mount a protest against this conviction to get it overturned. And so, of course, we sent it to her. She was a very, very dear friend of Nathan's. In fact, he would have liked to have married Ruth. But
That was after he'd married you or before?
Before, long before he knew me. But she was married. She married somebody else. But I heard all about it, and then we became good friends. We ended up living in Long Island together, so we got to know each other pretty well.
So what else was going on in the world at that time? That was before McCarthy?
Yeah, that was before, because I think we were already living in New York, and I remember.
Okay, let's go back a little bit. Finish up with State College, and then how you ended up in New York, and how, and then Dan came along and all that.
Well, Bob, we went there. David was a year old, and I had been offered a fellowship to get in the chemistry department, but because we couldn't get a place to live, I couldn't take it. I mean, the semester started.
This was at Penn State.
Yeah, at
Yeah.
Penn State. That was in 1947 when we went there. So, and that's why we ended up in McAlevy's Fort. I mean, there was and Nathan. The semester started. I moved in with my parents. Nathan went off to state college, and he was living in the dorm, and looking for a place for us to live. And the only thing he finally found this place in McAlevy's Fort.
But you had David then?
I had David.
Yeah.
He was a year old, and I had gone during the summer to look for housing. And this was when the veterans were coming back. They were going, coming back to school. There was no married student housing at that time. And there was this new apartment building that was just being finished about a block from the campus. And I tried to get an apartment there, and he was ready to, give me the apartment until I mentioned that I had a child.
Oh, wow.
And of course, that wouldn't be legal now, but it was then. And he said, well, I told everybody else who's moving in that there wouldn't be any children here. I said, my child is a year old. He sleeps through the night. In a year, this place you're renting to young married couples, you're going to have babies all full of babies. Well, I had no influence with him, and we didn't get the apartment. And sure enough, a couple of years later, when we were living in State College, we would drive by that apartment house, and there were baby carriages all around it. But anyway, we didn't get the apartment.
And then how long, you stayed there for 5 years?
Yeah, we were there for 5. Nathan got his degree, his doctorate, in less than 2 years. But he stayed on as a faculty member. He was teaching.
In the Department of Education?
No, it was the Department of Ed Psych, Educational Psychology. And he was teaching statistics.
Yeah, he always did, yeah.
Yeah. So he got, after we were at McAlevy's Fort, he managed to get an apartment in State College, right across the street from the campus, an apartment house. Everything modern, it was fine. And then a year later, we did get an apartment in faculty housing. Mm-hmm. And that's where Bob was born, and Sandy, both. Mm-hmm. But there was no hospital in State College, so they were both actually born in Bellefonte.
Yeah, I see that in Sandy's birth certificate.
Yeah.
So then what took you up to the New York area again?
Well, Nathan got a job.
But why did he leave?
Oh, well, this was when people were starting to be investigated for radical activities. And he was pretty much told by his department chairman, because their contract that he'd been working under was a Navy contract, and that he better look for another job, which he did.
But why was it particularly him? Was he considered a radical?
Well, yeah, he had belonged to radical organizations, as had I.
You seem to be a radical to me.
And
what do you mean by a radical organization?
Well, there's some things I'd rather not tell you.
Okay.
But he was blacklisted, in effect. He had interviews at a couple of different colleges, and they were very interested in him. And then a couple of weeks later, he would get notice that he didn't get the job. And then there was this opening in the National League for Nursing in New York. And so he says, that wasn't a college. They didn't care about your activities. And there was a friend of ours, Phil Ash, who had gone to State College at the same time that Nathan did, in the same program. And he had also, gotten his doctorate, and he was still there. And they were both looking for jobs. So they both were interviewed in New York. And Nathan got the job. And so then we had to find a place to live. Housing was very, very hard to get at that time. We had, by that time, we had 3 children and another one on the way.
He hadn't figured out what caused it yet.
No. So, came January when he had to start his job. He went to New York. I was still in State College. And then I went up there one weekend, spent a weekend looking. And the only thing we could find was an apartment in this garden apartment. Are you familiar with garden apartments? It
Yeah.
was a huge garden apartment complex at the very edge of Queens. It was almost near the Queens-Nassau County line. So it was very far from Manhattan. So I went out there to look at it, and I took the bus, and I went out there, and we were going forever and forever. I said, we're never going to move out here. I mean, it's just too far. But there was nothing else available, and so we did.
What are you talking about then in terms of rents?
It was $90 a month.
Yeah, that's what I paid for my first place.
Yeah.
And this was what year? 1951 or 2?
This was 52.
And this was during the Korean War then, right?
Yeah.
But you didn't have any role in that? That didn't affect you?
No, because I didn't have anybody in my family was not involved in that. So we took this apartment, and we had one car, and Nathan would drive the car to the subway in Queens and leave it at a parking lot and then take the subway into Manhattan, which meant that I was without a car.
Yeah, well,
But fortunately, after we'd been living there for a couple of months, we discovered the Long Island Railroad, which was just a couple of miles from where we lived. So I would drive him to the station, and he would take the train. And
but you weren't working then with the kids? Or
No.
You had 4 kids then?
I had 4 kids.
Wow. And David must have been going to school then, right?
He was in kindergarten.
In Queens?
In Queens, yeah. In fact, he was bused to school when we first moved there. And then they built an elementary school right across the street from where we lived. So that's where he went. And when Bob actually started there also. But then we bought a house in Long Island in Oceanside.
Yeah. So did you do anything for entertainment in those days, or just look after the kids? I mean, did you go into Manhattan to the shows and things?
Yes, we did. We did. And I had a neighbor that we became very friendly with, and she had 3 boys her youngest was a little bit older than David. So they were, all young. And they would babysit sometimes while we went to the theater.
So what was Nathan earning then? I mean, I'm just thinking about those days, probably a couple $1,000.
I don't really remember what he was earning then. What I do remember is when he first got the job at NYU. That was we had already moved to Oceanside.
When did you move there?
We moved there in 54, I think. Dan was 2, or maybe, either 54 or 50, maybe 55.
And that was because you wanted to buy a house, right? And you could buy one out there.
Yeah.
Because I remember seeing the purchase papers, and it was maybe I'm wrong, but $5,700 or something, the house?
No, that was our house in Washington.
Oh, okay.
But this house was $11,000.
Okay, 11,000 then.
And there was a new development in Oceanside with much more modern houses, nicer houses, but they were about $2,000 more. And Nathan said we just couldn't afford it.
Now, when you said in Washington, when was that? That was later?
No, that was before. That was when David was a baby.
Okay.
That was before we went to State College.
Okay.
We had bought a house in Washington. And that was, I think, $6,500 that we paid for that house.
Yeah, and I saw sometime around that period too, because I used to use it in my financial planning classes to talk about inflation. I had your home purchase, and then was the purchase, if I'm not mistaken, it was a Buick, I think, a Buick car, and
Pontiac.
it was a Pontiac, okay, but it had power glide,
Power steering.
and all that, and I think it was in the $2,000, $2,300 range.
No, I think it was closer close to $3,000.
Yeah, well,
Well, we were, neither one of us had a driver's license,
yeah.
and we were both new drivers, and we needed power steering. So
An automatic.
I don't mean power steering. Automatics.
Yeah. It
Automatic.
was Power Glide transmission, I remember it was called.
Yeah.
Because I used to show it to the class. I'd put a screen up and I'd show this. I'd say, this car today is $30,000. This house for $11,000 is now $250 or $300. I don't know what it would be today.
Well, when we lived in that house for 15 years, and when we sold it for I think $35,000.
Yeah.
But 10 years later, that house was worth $200,000.
Right. Yeah.
It's just dramatic changes.
Yeah. So now, so you moved to Long Island, but Nathan, sometime between the National League of Nursing and this time, got the job at NYU on top of that?
Yeah, well, what happened, he had gotten a job as an adjunct teaching, I think, like one night a week
Yeah.
at NYU, and also, I think, someplace else. And then when they had an opening for a full-time faculty member, he got the job. So he resigned from the National League for Nursing, but they didn't want they would have been lost without him. So immediately they contract, and when you're a professor, you don't work a 40-hour week. You have lots of free time. So they contracted with him to spend one day a week at the National League for Nursing. So that was a very nice addition to our income. But his first salary at NYU, I think, was $6,500.
Yeah, I remember him explaining to me some new statistical measure that he used. I can't remember some harmonic function or something that he developed in statistics when he was there. I can't remember what it was all about.
I think it was called the harmonic mean.
Yeah, and it was somehow useful in their testing. I forget now. I should look that up. Yeah, but when he did that, yeah. And then, so during that time is when you started the school stuff?
Well, he got the idea about scheduling for schools. And at that time, high schools used a McBee card. Do you remember McBee cards?
No.
Well, they were cards that had sort of like an IBM card that had holes all around them. And you used a long thing like a prong to sort them. And I know when I was in high school, I was on the scheduling committee. We weren't even that sophisticated. I don't know. We just did
When
it
you were in high school, you mean as a student?
Yeah. Certain students who were the top students were asked, and that was a great privilege to be able to do that, to be on the scheduling committee. And he had been on the scheduling committee in his high school. So now that computers were on the scene, and he had learned how to use, and the National League for Nursing had this mainframe computer that took up a whole room.
Yeah, I think he programmed in Fortran, didn't he?
Yeah, I think so. And so he spent one summer holed up in our study after work every night working on this program. And I think you saw the original flow chart that I gave. I showed it to Colin. He was flabbergasted. So he had developed this program that would schedule schools.
It was students to classes. It wasn't classes, or was it? I mean, someone else had to come up with a class schedule, if I remember right. Originally.
No. The students signed up for the classes that they were going to take.
Yeah.
And the school knew how many courses they were going to have, sections of each class, and who was going to teach them. But how to slot the kids into those classes.
Yeah, but when the classes were going to be held, isn't that what you did? I mean, wasn't there some... I know you handled exceptions, but you personally, right? When the computer couldn't...
I know, there were always conflicts.
Yeah.
There were conflicts, and then we would work out the conflicts. Yeah. But he developed the schedule, and then he had to try it out. He went to the Rockville Center was a town next to Oceanside. And he went to the Rockville Center High School. And he offered to do their scheduling free. And they said, well, they had already contracted with somebody else, but they would give him their data, for him to use. And so he did. He had their data, and he scheduled the school, and he gave them the schedules, and they saw his schedules and the schedules that they had paid for, and they threw the others away. And then, of
The
course,
rest is history.
that was our first school, and we contracted with them for many years. But in order to do the scheduling run, which was like a 15-hour run or something, my cousin Sarah's husband Abe was at Syracuse then. And he had access to their university computers. Anyway, Nathan went to Syracuse. And he could do just one run. He couldn't do more than one. And then by hand, we had to work out, any
Conflict.
inconsistency.
I thought when I met you, you were doing it at the National League for Nursing.
Oh, yes, that was afterwards.
And you got to use the computer at night, and that's why he was there at night.
Yeah, but that was the first scheduling run that he did was actually in Syracuse. So then, from once a guidance counselor from Rockville Center would go to some other school, and they would tell that school about us, and that's how we built up.
How was the most you had? Was it like 12 or something?
About 15 schools,
15
which was
schools.
too much. We couldn't. It really. That was an awful summer.
But you made good money at it, right? I mean, that's what made you the wealthy woman you are today.
We made very good money at that. Yes.
And then Nathan kept pumping his money into the TIA CREF program, right? And that's what's really created your pension, right?
Yes, well, at NYU had a very good pension, but you could put in additional money.
Yeah.
Up to a certain amount. Whatever the maximum was, he always put the maximum in.
Yeah.
And then we also had a KEO plan, which later was converted to an IRA.
Yeah.
Do you remember the KEO?
Yeah, sure. That was he was a senator or a congressman. His name was Keogh.
That right. It was
Keogh, right?
Right.
And he came up with this program, which has evolved now. Now we've got the 401ks and we've got the simple plans and all those different plans. But the original was for a self-employed person to have a pension plan.
Right.
That was before the IRA. Actually.
Yes.
And now everybody's rolled their Keogh into an IRA now. Yeah. But that all helped, and we're still taking money out of the IRA. You take, what, $4,000 or $5,000 a year out right now, don't you?
Actually, I just made the deposit about $7,000.
Yeah. Amazing, isn't it?
I have 2 IRAs left. The one at the Hudson City Bank and Fort Lee, and then another one which it's been turned over from one bank to another. Right now it's Wells Fargo, but it's been all kinds of different things.
And then you got the one with KMS.
Yeah, well those were Nathan's IRAs. Then I had one at KMS.
But they're all, so that's been.
Yeah, I mean there's very little left in any of those.
Well, it's amazing today, you say you have very little left, but there are people retiring today with less than that, which is kind of frightening. That don't have the pensions that you have or that used to exist. They've been all taken away.
I'm sure that people who have gone to work for NYU since then do not get as generous pensions and health care plans as I had.
They cover you still get the health.
Oh, absolutely, and I don't pay anything for it.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
It's United Healthcare is my secondary insurance.
Yeah. I know. So anyway, so that's how you got onto the island, so to speak. And that was then you moved back into Manhattan. Was that after Sandy left? Was Dan in Manhattan with you?
No. It was after when we had this plan for about 5 years before. When Dan graduated from high school and he went off to college, That's when we moved into Manhattan in 1970
With Rick.
with Rick, who was then in second grade, I think.
And then you went over to Winston Towers after that.
Right.
That's where I met you. That was 1975. You were living in Winston Towers.
Yeah, we lived in Manhattan for about 3 or 4 years. And then they changed it subsequently. But at that time, they were saying that once you retired from NYU, you couldn't stay in the faculty housing. So we figured we were going to have to move sometime. And, we went to see those apartments.
But when you say living in faculty housing, you weren't living in faculty housing.
Yes, we were.
I thought you were. I thought you were on Long Island.
No, when we were in Manhattan.
And when you moved back, you lived in faculty housing.
Yes, that.
That was down near Greenwich Village, was it, area?
And yes. NYU had built these 3 towers, and one of them was a co-op that you could buy into, and the other 2 were rentals. But you had to be on the faculty to live there.
So you sold your place to move into a rental,
Right.
and then you bought another place when they said you can't live here anymore.
Well, Nathan was still teaching then, so we could live there. But we knew the time would come when he would be retiring. And also, Rick was in elementary school, and it was a pretty good elementary school. But the junior high that he would have gone to, was really terrible. And he probably would have had to go to a private school. So because of that, and we went to see these apartments. They just had the model apartments we had seen the ad for, and they looked very nice, and so we bought it.
If you had to go back, I mean, we all think about this. Was there anything you would have done differently now? Do you feel you have had a good life? I mean, some things you might have done differently? I do for me, but
Well, not really. I mean, I did have a very good life. I was very fortunate. And when we first, while we were in Oceanside, I got my master's degree in education. And I was teaching in the elementary school. I taught second grade for 3 years. That was before Rick was born.
yeah, and you didn't like it.
No, I didn't. I didn't like teaching.
Was it the students you didn't like?
No, I had nice kids. I just didn't like teaching. I found it boring, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you do the same thing every year.
Yeah.
Different kids. And and that's when Nathan's business was expanding, the scheduling business. Yeah. And he really needed me to work on it, so that's all I had to hear.
Yeah.
And so after three years, you get tenure. So I worked for 3 years. I would have gotten my tenure.
So you could have gone back.
No, once I resigned. If they had hired me, they would have had to hire me again.
But what does tenure mean?
Tenure means you can't be fired.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't mean that they owe you. If you leave voluntarily, it doesn't mean you get your job back.
Okay. So what do you think is what do you, I'm not trying to be profound here, but what do you feel most proud of in your life?
I don't know.
Well, I can tell you what I feel most proud of, and I think what you should feel most proud of. Your kids.
Well, I would say my children. I think we raised 5 great kids.
Yeah. Or maybe they were great and you just happened to come along for the ride. That's what I think sometimes.
Well, I think they have been influenced by the example that we set as to how to be parents.
Mm-hmm.
I think we were good parents. We were indulgent parents, but up to a point.
You think?
What?
You think?
I mean,
Still.
but our kids are the same way.
Yeah.
I mean, look at you and Sandy. What you do for your kids?
Well, you mean we just bought them new cars? You mean? Nah. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, but it is amazing how they're all such nice people. That's what I think. You know, they're different, but they're all
Yeah,
great
they are.
people.
They all are very different, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
I would say, all my kids, Sandy and Bob are the most alike.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't you think so? Don't you think?
I
so?
don't, in all honesty, I know Bob the least. I know him and I've talked with him
Yeah.
over the years, but I don't know Bob like I know David, because we've spent a lot of time together and we've talked a lot, and we've been on vacation together, and I really like being with him. I hope he likes being with me too. I mean, because he's probably going to hear this sometime, and Barbara and I can laugh a lot. We laugh a lot together. So, and then of course it's, Dan likes to do the same things I like to do, go
Right,
outside,
you like to
and
bike
ride our
ride
bikes, and being with Richie and walking, and so that's, and of course, how could I not know Rick and all his strengths and weaknesses? Heck, he's essentially lived with us and on and off, and we, have a wonderful time with the kids. That's, for me, like the best thing is, I watched that little film of William singing in the choir the other night.
Oh, did you see it?
So amazing, that to see him, his
He puts everything into it.
his joy of life is so great, and so I feel for me that's been really lucky. I mean, Bob and I talk sometimes,